Hi, my name's Rosa. It's good to see you again. I'm also joined by Percy today. I think that he's going to be quieter purring next to me than he was meowing outside the door, so we'll give this a try. So today I actually had a kind of exciting update for you guys on my last week. We really had a fantastic experience. We got to experience the manifestation of a short-term goal that I made a couple of months ago. So I've talked to you guys about my why and why I want to pursue this health journey. And one of the biggest things that I want to do is enjoy and experience life to the fullest and not be tied down by my health and what I'm able to do, and to be able to go hiking, to be able to travel, and just to enjoy and visit a lot. And there's a lot of places that I want to go, or a lot of things that I want to do that I haven't purposely pursued in recent years because I didn't know that I felt capable or healthy enough to physically accomplish them the way that I wanted to. And one of those was to go visit New York City and just spend my time walking all over the city and enjoying that. I knew that that was likely a 10 to 15 mile a day walk when I did go. And I was mentally preparing myself for that and putting it out of my mind because I knew that I wasn't there at that point. So back in September 11th, I had this spark and I wrote it down. I want to go to New York City and experience the beauty of the city and the energy. I realized today that I can treat this like food. I can enjoy the journey and eat the food I want to eat when I reach my goal now. Similarly, I can do this trip soon and practice living the life I want to now and enjoy the joy in the journey. I do not need to wait for this, but in the meantime, this is a really great reason to practice walking more now. So I wrote that on September 11th, and 10 days later is when I started walking, when I acted on that and started preparing for that. So when I had this spark, I went and talked to my husband about it. And my husband is the kind of person that he's up for anything. He's up for any kind of a trip. He's up for any kind of a challenge. He's up for he's just a really happy, loving guy that just enjoys life. And so of course he was all for this. So we looked into our schedule of how we could figure that out. And that was probably one of the hardest things to do, is to figure out a time we go in our schedule with my husband's work schedule, with the time off that he has available, with my son's school schedule, and with my work schedule. Being able to go at a time that was not too crazy busy for any of us. And that was one of the most difficult things. The time that we wanted to spend in New York was probably 2 to 3 days, plus a day to get there and a day to get back. And after a few weeks of looking at this, we decided to change our plans a little bit because we know that we're up against flight issues and weather issues this time of year as well, in addition to just trying to find the 5 days to go anyway. And so we changed our plans a little bit a few weeks into this spark, that we would look at something closer to home. And so the place closest to home that I most wanted to visit and experience this same type of thing, like being able to get out and enjoy and see the energy and experience that, was Sedona. To be honest, my husband and I are a lot more nature people and a lot less city people. We just hadn't been to New York, and so that experience is something we still want to do at some point. But right now it can wait. But we did want to get away and go hiking and go experience one of just time together and a beautiful place with a lot of energy for us. And we live about 4.5 hours from Sedona, and we've not spent very much time there in our lives at all. I've been a total of 4 times. I've only gone once with my husband for more than a few hours. We went about 8 years ago for 2 or 3 days, he and I. And at that time in my life, I was just recovering from a real serious illness So at that time, I also was not capable of doing much but being there. But this time I wanted it to be different. I wanted to experience the hiking and get out and about and just see a lot more of it than I've ever experienced before. So that was our goal. And so I have been walking with that in mind to try to build up my endurance and my stamina. And then we figured out a time on our calendar when we could go, and we went. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that because we had a really incredible time. So the first day that we went, my husband and I scheduled spa services for ourselves. And my husband, a couple years ago, had a massage that was longer than he recognized he could comfortably do. And by the time I got done with that massage, he could barely walk because he had been on the table for so long. And he felt way worse afterwards than he did before. So I didn't think that was going to be me, but that's exactly what happened to me this time. So I scheduled myself 3 hours of spa service, and that last hour I was dying and I could not enjoy it at all. So we got out of there, and my back hurt so bad, but I wanted to get out and just enjoy Sedona. We had hardly been there. We had just gotten there the night before, really late. All we did was eat breakfast that morning and go to the spa. So we looked up, or I'd read about a trail that seemed like we were capable of doing it, even though I felt so terrible that day after spending a few hours in the spa, ironically. And so we went out to Soldier's Trail, and that was really a beautiful place to go. And it was probably the perfect hike for us that day. And so it's probably, I don't think we hiked more than a mile each direction, so a mile in and a mile back. And within that mile, it's a fairly easy hike. We saw a sinkhole that's pretty cool to see. We saw the 7 sacred pools. We didn't go the whole length of the trail. It was starting to get dark. It was starting to sprinkle a little bit. And so we turned around and went back. But we did experience hiking, and we did enjoy it. And so on that hike, I was reminded of this book that I read when I was probably my son's age. My son is 10. And in that book, the book is called What Goes Up Must Come Down. And in that book, this little 11-year-old girl made it her mission to get her mother out of her apartment. And so her mother, they lived in a 5th floor walk up in New York City. And her mother experienced, she was afraid to leave the apartment, and she was also not in great health. And so she hadn't left the apartment in years. And this little girl hatched a plan to get her mother out of the apartment. And it was really a terrible plan, and no kid should follow it. But I was thinking about that book when I was reading it, or when I was walking up the hill on the hike, and I was thinking the exact opposite. I was thinking, what goes down must come up. And so that was what I had in my mind. Every time I would choose to go further, if I go down this, that means I got to walk up it. And so I had that in mind, and that was kind of my mantra as we were hiking. What goes down must come up. And so the next day, it was predicted to be bad weather, and we didn't know that before we left. We didn't even look at the weather before we left. It was supposed to be rainy and snowy, and temperature between 32 and 42 degrees. And that was our main day that we had planned on hiking. And so we woke up not quite knowing what we're going to do. We had driven around town the day before, so we knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know that it would happen. And what I wanted to do was go hike Devil's Bridge. And the parking lot You can drive up to a closer trail, but you need 4-wheel drive, high clearance vehicle, which we did not have that day. And so the parking lot otherwise is about, well, it's about a 5.8 mile trip, round trip. We didn't pack snow or rain gear. We didn't even think about it. And so that morning we were trying to figure out what to do, whether to even go. I really wanted to go because that was one of my purposes of coming, is just to experience hiking and do things I hadn't done before. And I wasn't ready to put that, to give up on that. And so that morning as we were eating breakfast, we were talking about where we can go get rain gear. And all I wanted was a poncho. We had enough to keep us warm. There's not a Walmart in Sedona, but there's one about 25 miles away. So that was our backup plan. But I just Googled where to buy rain gear in Sedona, and Ace Hardware came up. And so we went to Ace Hardware and we found rain ponchos, $13 a piece, and we were set. So we get to the trailhead, and it was drizzly, and there was snow, and it was raining. It was really cold and windy, but there were also hundreds of people there. And so I told my husband, let's just go. We don't have to go the whole way. Let's just give it a try, and we can turn around at any time. He was a lot less enthusiastic about it than I was. And I will say this whole hike, he was part cheerleader and part grump. He was probably more cheerleader than he was grump, and thankfully, because I needed it in the end. So we waited in our car and watched the wind and the snow just pelt in. He kept telling me, are you sure you want to go? But it looked like there was a little bit of a break, so we put on our ponchos and we just took off. And it was mostly a fairly easy trail for a long time. And then we were going downhill, and I kept thinking, what goes down must come up. And I was thinking that was going to be the hardest part. Okay, so we get to the trailhead. So this is almost 2 miles in that we get to the trailhead up to Devil's Bridge. And Devil's Bridge is this really beautiful arch. And then we start walking that hike. And the trailhead said it was a moderate hike. And at first I was thinking, so first of all, I was probably one of the least prepared people on that trail that day. Everybody else looked like they hiked daily. There were a few people that I probably was in slightly better physical shape than, but most people beat me by a long shot. So we were walking the trail, and it's about a mile on that trail. So the first half of it, I was thinking, this is actually pretty easy. I don't know what they're saying about it being moderate. And then I ate my words immediately after that. The next half mile is pretty much a stair step kind of situation where you're just walking up stairs of sandstone for half a mile. And the last couple hundred feet, it's almost climbing. And the stairs or the steps are probably 1.5 feet apart, and you're just going up the one cliff face and then up another. And it's not super scary. You don't feel really exposed, but it was exhausting. And by that point, I was already resting every 50 feet or so, I was already stopping to rest. But by the time I climbed that last couple hundred feet, I was dying, and I was just feeling my heart pounding. My legs were jello. Every time I'd see a tree that I could lean on, I would lean on it, or a rock that I could sit on that looked like I'd get up again. And this is where the cheerleader and my husband really came out, because he was really good about it at this point. His grumpiness had largely left. So we get up to Devil's Gate and see that arch, and it is beautiful. And I was so grateful I went, and it was worth every moment. Filming this? Yeah, that's incredible. We get some pictures. We weren't up there very long. And I will say, like, throughout the morning, it had rained and snowed a little bit. At this point, it was not stormy, but we could see a storm off in the distance. And we could see it coming like across the valley, and it was so beautiful. And we took pictures of it, like, oh, look how pretty. And then out of nowhere, while we're still at the top of the cliff, it just starts to pelt this little tiny pelletized snow, and a lot of it, and hail. And we were at the very top at that point. And my husband and I just look at each other, and he says, let's get down now. Let's get down the part we had to climb. Don't put your poncho on, nothing, just get down. And the adrenaline was pumping, and we booked it down the hill. I was generally worried about getting stuck up there and it being really slick and not being able to get down the part where we needed to climb. And so we got down that piece really fast, a lot faster than I wanted to. And at the bottom of the climbing part, there's kind of a little, there's a little cutout in the rock, a little half cave. And so our goal was to get down there and then put our raincoats on, get our rain gear on. So just about as we got there, so just at the bottom of the climbing part, a very loud thunderclap hit. And at that point, I got very scared. I thought, oh my goodness, what have we done? We're at the top of a mountain. And there's already snow and rain everywhere. I mean, by now it was white. Snow and hail, I should say. It wasn't slippery yet that we had stepped on, but we knew the potential was real serious. And so we sat in that alcove for probably about 10-15 minutes and just watched the storm and worried about the people that were still up there, because there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 groups still up there when we left, and we hadn't seen them come down yet. And after a little bit, there was a break in the storm, and my husband said, you know what, I think we should get out now. And I didn't know if it was going to be, you know, a snow from then on, or if it was just a come and go situation. And so not knowing that, I agreed with him and we decided to go. So we're about to step out and I was like, Brandon, we just got to pray. We just got to pray and make sure that we get out of this safely. And he looks at me and he says, I just put my hat on. And I told him, the Lord's going to understand, leave it on. And so I just said a real quick prayer, like, don't let us break a leg, please. Just help us get out of here safely. And we did. And so that first half mile where we were stair stepping down, that was, to me, probably the scariest part. It did stop storming, and I don't actually think we had much weather from that point on. But then everything was muddy, or potentially slick. It wasn't too slick. And there were 2 or 3 times where one of us slipped, but it wasn't real bad, and we caught ourselves. Anyway, so as we continued to hike, the trail got more and more muddy. Part of the trail is on a road, and we started to take that. And the rocks, there's a lot of it that's sandstone, and there's a lot of it that's sand, and there's a lot of it that's clay. And so depending on where you were, it was different degrees of slippery and muddy. But in total that day, I walked 7.5 miles, and that's more than I've done in this last month and a half of walking. It's more than I've done by a long shot. I think the most I've walked other than that is 6 miles. And this wasn't just walking, this was hiking. So the difficulty is probably twice that of walking. The last mile or two of that hike, even though the terrain was not bad, the last mile or two was really difficult. And by the time we got back to the car, I was super grateful to be back to the car. So my husband asked me that night whether I was glad I did it or not. And the next morning. And that night I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure. I did tell him if I had realized the last half mile of the hike to Devil's Gate was as difficult as it was, especially the last couple hundred feet, I don't think I would have done it. I wasn't prepared for that. I was already tired at that point. So I'm kind of glad I didn't know how difficult that last part was for me. Anyway, but the next day, looking back at it, at this point, I'm looking backwards. I have nothing but fond memories of that hike. It was so beautiful. It tested my endurance and my strength and my abilities, my faith, and I'm so grateful that we did that. I'm even grateful for the terrifying experience that we had with the weather, and for not being as prepared as we probably should have been. I'm just grateful that we had that experience, and I'm grateful that my husband turned to a cheerleader at that point. And I'm super grateful that we acted on that spark that we had 2 months ago to just go and do and enjoy the journey. And I'm going to do a lot more of it. Thank you so much. Love you all.